So this is the Grand Tour Scandi Flick, and my readers have asked me 2 questions about it, which I'm going to answer in this video.
What, so it's just a log in a hole?
Yep.
Tied to another log?
Yep.
And you reckon that's going to be enough to pull a ton and a half of cart that's...
Oh yeah.
So in this scene, James May has sunk his Mitsubishi Evo 8 into the ice, and he is going to be recovered in a couple of different methods. And the questions that my readers or viewers had for me was, 1, was it possible the way that they did it? And secondly, was it actually safe? And that's the questions I'm going to answer. Now, a rider, before we do that, this video is just for fun. I've made a lot of simplifications here and a lot of assumptions, but still I think it gives an idea. And of course, there's a line between entertainment and getting things exactly right. If something's got to be watchable, then you can't make it too dry and boring. But there is an important point to be made. Now, this F-truck was bogged in the US several weeks ago, and what's important about it is that the driver died during the recovery. The recovery was done incorrectly, and the tow bar, part of the tow hitch, went through the windscreen and killed the driver. So there actually is a conversation to be had about how responsible you should be when showing things like four-wheel drive recovery practices versus entertainment. I'm not going to get into that here, but that is a question. All right, so let's move on with the analysis then. And first thing we've got to do is look at the angle the car is coming out on. So I sort of took that angle here as horizontal, that as the angle it's coming out, 15 degrees. Then we look at the mass of the car, which is about 1,400-ish kilos. Look at the weight of an Evo 8. There's some water on it. I'm going to round it up to 1,500 kilos. And then when we drag a force of 1,500 kilos on a 15-degree angle, we can work it out. That's 388 kilograms. And if you're thinking, hang on, that should be newtons, well, we're coming to that. Next, we've got to look at the towing or sliding resistance, because if this was on hard concrete, then it'd probably be about 1 or 2% of the vehicle's weight. It's not. It's being dragged backwards. I'm just going to add 10%, another 150 kilograms on that. And then that gives us a total of 550, which is probably a bit conservative. Then we're not pulling it in that direction. We're sort of pulling at this angle here, which is another 15 degrees. So I'm going to add another 70-ish, 20 or so for that. And that brings us round about to 570 or 5,600 newtons. So that's the amount of force we need to put on this rope here to drag that vehicle backwards fairly conservatively. Now we need to look at how they actually pulled the car out, and the way they did that was they took this long lever here to cut down a tree and made a lever out of it, put it around this log which is vertically into the ice, and that created a capstan winch, and that wound the rope on, and then they just walked around in a circle and just winched it in that way. So the question is, was that real? Could it have worked? All right, so let's take a look then. First thing we need to do is figure out the length of that lever. Now, fortunately, there was this clip of Richard Hammond walking next to it, which is kind of perpendicular on, which is ideal. And now we can use his height to figure out the length. Now, I looked up on the internet how tall Richard Hammond was, and he's 1.65 meters. So allowing for the fact he's probably not stretched to his full height here, we'll call that 1.55 meters. We'll then see how many Richard Hammonds we can fit here, and the answer is about 3.1, which gives us a lever length of about 4.8 meters, assuming that's exactly level. So that's the first part. Okay, then how much force can these three generate at the end of the lever is the next question, and that statistic is not available when you search the internet, so I had to calculate it myself. And I'm also going to assume that they're wearing high traction snow boots here as well, because otherwise they'll be slipping over. So, how much force can the Grand Tour presenters generate? Good question. Well, how much force can a 50-year-old adult male generate is our starting point, and that's me. I am 50 years old, roughly of Grand Tour presenter age, so if I figure out how much force I can generate, then I should be able to extrapolate that back. So that's what I did. I have a load cell which I normally use for four-wheel drive testing. I went out into the bush, and this is what happened. So I'm going to use myself as an adult male of approximately Grand Tour presenter age, see how much force I can generate. So I've got a load cell here which is recording via Bluetooth to that phone over there, so let's see what I can do. look at the results of that and calibrate it according to age and mass of the Grand Tour presenters. So I peaked out at 86 kilograms. Now let's take 3/4 of that, that's 64, which is equivalent to 627 Newton. So that's how much force I can generate. Now let's compare me as a baseline against the presenters. So I weigh 85 kilograms, 627 Newtons is what I can generate. There's no factor to me because I am me. I'm 50 years of age. I hike and I work out. I don't have any injuries. So if I was there, I reckon I'd be able to have produced 627 Newtons at the end of that lever. So let's take Jeremy. Jeremy is significantly taller and heavier than me. He weighs 107 kilograms, so 126% of my weight. However, he is 12 years older. He is, by his own admission, overweight and he smokes. So I'm going to say he's 101% of my strength, so that's 633 Newtons for him. James is 93 kilograms, heavier than me, but he's 9 years older, and of course the older you get, you do lose strength. He does appear to be unfamiliar with the concept of exercise, as is Jeremy. He is only semi-serviceable, having smashed himself just recently in that Evo tunnel incident, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to go for 70% of, as a factor there. 439 Newtons is what I can estimate he can do. Richard, as we all know, is the smallest, 64 kilograms, so that's 78% of my weight. He is closest to me in age, 52. He seems to be pretty fit because he's the one that gets to do things like run with the sled dogs and do anything which involves physical fitness. So run with 78 there, 489 Newtons. So that means the three presenters combined give us 1,562 Newtons of force. So here's the Evo, which is stuck. Here is the lever going around in a circle. So we're going to take Richard's 489 and we're going to put him on the inside because he's the shortest by 3.5 metres, 1712 Newton metres. Then James, 1756, Jeremy at the end because he's tallest, 2977. That means 645 Newton metres of torque going around here. I'm going to take 10% of friction off. I've got no idea. I told you a lot of simplifications in this. 5,800 Newton metres of torque is what we're looking at to pull that vehicle out. Now the force required to pull it out is actually 5,600 newtons times 0.1 metres, which gives us 560 Newton metres. So 5,800 minus 560, definitely yes. So these three would be able to produce way more than enough torque to pull that Evo out. So that was realistic. So a couple of pointers for that. Does that seem right? Well, yes, it does. Here is a bogged four-wheel drive. Here is my friend. This vehicle cannot drive up the hill because it's bellied out and it's up a muddy hill. It weighs probably about 2.1 tonnes or thereabouts, and he is able by himself, because I'm just watching and taking photographs, to drag it up that muddy hill. So one human, given a long enough lever, can actually move vehicles easily enough. So it's possible. Now we come to the question of I guess realism. So here is the hole which Richard drilled into the ice. Now how thick or deep is that hole? Don't really know. What we do know, and I looked it up, that you do need ice of a thickness of around 200 to 300 millimetres to drive on, and I'm going to assume it's towards the low end, otherwise James wouldn't have gone in. So that's basically what they had. They had Evo in its ice cage there, and had people pushing on that lever, and that would have gone through, and that would be about 200 mil thick. Now, I've not done an ice recovery, but I'd love to know from people who have, but I would have thought that with that amount of force that the pole here would have just fallen over like that, unless they did something like have a really long pole and possibly push it down to the bottom, or just make it strong enough so that wouldn't. I said I haven't done that ice recovery. If you have, please let me know, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to sleep at night for wondering about exactly how that would work. All right, now let's talk a little about velocities here, because in the film you do see the Evo move fairly quickly, and well, is that realistic? Let's take a look. So if these guys are walking around at 2 kilometers an hour, that's 0.55 meters per second. Radius of leader, we'll call that in effect 4 meters. Radius of the capstan is 0.1 meters. That means that this rope is coming in at a speed of 0.0005 kilometers a second, or very, very slowly, and we see the vehicle moving a lot quicker than that in the movie. So that's not realistic, and there certainly wouldn't have been that amount of elasticity in it either. All right, then let's talk about power and torque. This is quite interesting because here is a Lancer final edition. That's the 10th version. James is driving the 8th, but I have driven the 10th and I really liked it, so I'm going to use the 10. Got a 2-litre engine, 226 kilowatts of power, 414 newton meters. And you might be thinking, hang on, well, these guys were producing 5,800 newton meters of torque, and that's a lot of torque. In fact, it's as much as 14 Lancer Evolution 10s. How can that be right? It just seems wrong. Well, it is right, because here's how it works. We've got this 4-meter lever, and when they walk around in a circle, that's 25 meters in circumference. Now, if they're walking at 2 kilometers an hour, that's 1.3 revs per minute. Now, given the revs and the torque, we can calculate the power, and that gives us 0.8 kilowatts. And I think you'll agree, 0.8 kilowatts is significantly less than 226. So this is the interesting thing about power and torque. Torque is a turning force, power is how quickly that turning force is applied. Now, by comparison, the Evo doesn't have a lot of torque, but it can produce it very, very quickly indeed, and you can gear it down and get more torque, and that's why it's got gearboxes, and four-wheel drives have got transfer cases, etc. So an interesting contrast there. Now, also another question is, how fast would these guys need to walk to produce 226 kilowatts of power? And it turns out that they need to go around at 372 revs per minute, which would mean running at 561 kilometers an hour, or about Mach 0.45, nearly half the speed of sound, which is infeasible. So they're not going to be able to produce as much power as the Evo, even if they can produce the torque. So now we come to the second part of the question, which is safety. And again, there's that trade-off there between making something which is easy to watch and very entertaining, but technically accurate and very safe. Where do you draw that line? Anyway, first thing to note is everything is really cold, which means that braking strengths are likely to go down, going to be less flexible, a bit more brittle, etc. Then we've got the rope they use, and that is actually unrated, as the presenters say this.
What's the braking strain of the rope?
I don't know. Just rope.
Now, whenever you're doing any form of vehicle recovery, you should be using equipment that you know the braking strain of, as opposed to just a random bit of rope. So that's an important point. Then they tie a knot in it, as Jeremy says to James.
Right, May, give this a really good knot and attach it to the tow bar, yeah?
So they're using a knot. Now, the alternative is to use a splice, and a splice will give you probably about 90–95% of the original strength of the rope, whereas if you knot a rope, then you're going to reduce the strength of the rope maybe to 50–60%, so significantly less. And you want to be going out there with rope which is pre-spliced, ready to use, or alternatively, you can do it in the field. You just need things like a sharp knife, electrical tape, and a FID, or a biro, even in extremis, the way you can make your own splicing. Then we are recovering off a tow bar, which is a no-no, and a four-wheel drive expert in the UK, I'm not familiar with British tow bars, pointed out that they'd hooked the rope around the tow ball portion, which is here, and they really should have used a pintle hook, which is there, and you can see it better in this photograph at this point, because then that's in double shear and it's just stronger. So again, that should have been done. Now, that was difficult to do because James had to reach his hand down into freezing water, and that would have been awful. I have actually done exactly the same thing, although it was mud and a bit warm, so it's not easy to do, but it's something which, you know, you can't really compromise on safety. All right, then the snatch recovery itself, which was interesting. So the first thing is they are using a Kerr or elastic tow rope, and I really wish they had just inserted a line of dialogue to say, I don't know, James could have said, why are you going to use that rope then? And Richard could have said, well, we're actually going to use a specialist elastic tow rope designed for this purpose, and people would know it's just not just a random bit of rope. But I'm pretty sure it is a sort of kinetic energy recovery rope specifically designed for this sort of elastic kinetic pull here, so it's good that they used that. Now, James is standing too close here. He's only a couple of meters away, and that's dangerous because the amount of force involved in that is tremendous. Again, people have been killed by it, and I've put this diagram together. This is the recovery operation going here, and based on things like reading coroner's reports, yes, actual coroner's reports, I reckon you need probably about up to 90 meters here, because these bits of metal can fly a very long way, and you want to go perpendicular out, and that's your safe zone here, not over there, and he's just way too close. All right, then they are using the best car because it's the heaviest car. Now, Jeremy actually does say this.
I could get close enough to use my V8.
But the fact it's a V8 is actually irrelevant because you're going to be using first gear. He could have done that with 1/10 of the power because you really... with first gear, you've got lots of torque to the wheels and it's a heavy vehicle. What you want in a kinetic energy recovery system is a heavy vehicle because the heavier the vehicle is, the slower it can go, and the slower this recovering vehicle goes, the safer it's going to be. So I would definitely have chosen the Audi over the Subaru, both for all-wheel drive because it's heavier, not because it's got the V8. And then he's heading in the correct direction, which I think is perhaps more of a coincidence than anything else. When you are doing this sort of kinetic recovery, you want to be having the recovering car going forwards, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the driver can better see where they're going. Two, the differentials are stronger in the forward direction and rear direction. And three, the stress tends to be more on the rear differential, which is typically stronger than the front differential. And I personally have damaged the vehicle doing a recovery like this, although not in ice, going backwards, so I know of what I talk here. Anyway, I'd like to extend a massive thank you to the Grand Tour team for producing such amazing films over the years, and a trio of presenters. I am a really huge fan of that. And again, I'm really interested in this conversation about entertainment versus accuracy because I feel it is important. I hate seeing people injured and damaged, and I feel we've got an example to set, but how far can you go with that and still make it watchable? I don't know. Let's talk in the comments about that. And if you do have any questions or comments or anything else you've got to say on this, let's get the conversation started. It's just meant to be a bit of light-hearted fun and a bit educational. So I guess thanks for watching.